Today, we are going to discuss working with the vendor card. If you've watched the video on how to create a vendor in the system, you'll know it's fairly easy to generate a new vendor and fill in all the fields on a vendor card. What this video aims to provide for you is how to work with the vendor card. How do I find certain information out about this particular vendor? So what we're going to do is we're going to open up a vendor card and we're going to start working with it. And we'll be asking a series of questions and then give you answers to those questions so that you can find out that information that you're looking for. So let's go out to a vendor card. If I go out to the purchase button, I'll choose planning and then choose vendors from there. This will bring us out to a vendor card. Now here, let's say how do I find out what my balance is with the vendor? And what entries make up that balance? Well, this particular question is fairly easy to answer because if you look on the General tab here, we actually have this field called Balance. What you might not know is that in this Balance field is once you click into that field, you'll notice you get this drill down arrow. That drill down arrow, once you click on that, will bring you to the vendor ledger entries for this particular vendor. So it brings you to vendor ledger entries filtered on this case on Nissan Forklift Corporation, and it shows you all of the ledger entries that were ever created for this vendor. Now, how do I know which entries make up that particular balance, that $735 balance? Well, you'll notice here we have this open column. If you scroll down in this list, anything that is open from this particular vendor will be what's calculated as that, in this case, the $735. So I have 4 open invoices for $183.91 for this particular vendor, and that is the combination of all those 4 make up that particular balance. Now, if you had open payments, it would certainly take off that credit amount from the vendor. And if you actually also had open credit memos for this vendor, it would take that into account as well when calculating that balance. Now, right from these vendor ledger entries, how can I get back to the original invoice that generated a particular entry so that I can maybe reprint that? So let's take, for instance, this open ledger entry here from 8/15/04. It's invoice number 237. Let's say I wanted to get back to that particular invoice number, that document that created this ledger entry. Well, how do I do that? Right from these ledger entries here, if you just click anywhere in the field and make sure that your focus is on the particular invoice that you want to navigate back to, just select that and choose Navigate. And what happens is the system goes back through and it tells you all of the different transactions that were posted in the system when this document, VCH 237, was created. So here we show a posted purchase invoice, GL entry, vendor ledger entries, and even value entries. So here, if we click on the posted purchase invoice line and click on the show button, this will bring us back out to our posted purchase invoices table, allowing us to now reprint this invoice. I can come here, choose print, and then I'll just preview it on screen and minimize this navigation pane just so you can see this. Brings us right back to that purchase invoice that we posted in the system. It shows the purchase order number that created this, the date of that particular purchase order, and of course the items that make that up. So $183.91. So I'm going to close back out of that and reopen our navigation pane. If I back to the navigate pane here, you'll notice that navigate window rather. In this particular window, it also shows other transactions that occurred. For instance, if I wanted to see the GL entries that were created when this invoice was posted, it shows here there's a quantity of 6. I can click on the show button here, and it brings me out to the general ledger entries that were created. So it looks like I had direct cost applied here. There's a particular payables account and so forth for this particular vendor from this invoice when it got created. So you can easily navigate back to that posted purchase invoice or any of the other entries that were created upon the posting of that particular invoice. Okay, how do I tell the system to pay to a vendor's corporate office instead of their local office? Let's close out of this for a second. Let's go out and take a look at Midland Machinery Company Incorporated. Here on Midland's vendor card, this happens to be, let's say, their local office as a hypothetical example. So I've got their local office in Tonawanda, New York. But what this vendor told me is that whenever I order from them, they want to make sure that I go ahead and pay my invoices to the corporate office. Now, the corporate office, in this case, I'm going to need to tell the system that whenever I create an invoice from this vendor, that I want to pay to a different vendor. And I do that by going over to the Invoicing tab. And here I have a field called Pay to Vendor Number. You'll notice here if I click on the lookup arrow, it brings me back out to my vendor list of course focused on Midland Machinery Company. And what you would do is you'd simply create a second vendor for this called, let's say, Midland Machinery Corporate, as I've done here. Now, by choosing Midland Machinery Corporate, I specify that here for this vendor. Whenever I put that vendor onto, let's say, a purchase invoice, it will put the pay to vendor as the corporate office as opposed to the local office. And just to demonstrate that, if I go out to order processing and create a new invoice, choosing vendor Midland Machinery Corporate Company here, vendor number 27, and I say OK. Once I enter off of that field, you'll notice here the buy from is for the Tonawanda office, but when I move over to invoicing, the actual pay to is to the main office, 101 Main Street in Boston, Massachusetts. So you create a second vendor, and then right from here you can fill in that information by choosing the pay to vendor number of the additional one. Now all the ledger entries will get created on this pay to vendor number's vendor card. So anything that you post to this vendor, the ledger entries will go to the pay to vendor. Okay, how do I determine what payables account a vendor's entries are being posted to? Well, that's fairly simple to do. Right from the invoicing tab here, we have this field called the vendor posting group. You need to define a vendor posting group for each one of your vendors, and what that posting group does is it determines the GL accounts to post to for certain transactions. And one of those that it defines is the payables account. As I clicked on the lookup arrow, it brings me out to my vendor posting groups window, and here for the trade posting group, it looks like I'm posting to GL account 21010, which is our payables account, which happens to be accounts payable trade under our current liabilities. Okay, now how can I set up special pricing for items that I purchase from this vendor? Well, right from the purchases button on the vendor card, I can go down to prices and establish prices here. If I click on that, it'll allow me to establish prices for specific items. For more information on how to do this, be sure to watch our video on establishing prices for vendors for our particular items. How do I establish different order addresses for a vendor? Okay, a little bit different than the pay to vendor number in this particular case. The pay to vendor number is I'm specifying a different pay to vendor for invoices that get generated for, let's say, a local vendor. Well, let's go back out to Nissan Forklift Corporation, and let's say here this is their corporate office, and we usually order from them, but they decided to open up a local office. So I have a different order address that I can enter into the system for this Nissan Forklift Corporation. And I do that by going to the vendor button and choosing order addresses. Here, this will allow me to create a new order address for this vendor. So let's call this Hartford. So this is their Hartford office. You'll notice I type in Hartford, it enters in the company's name automatically, and let's say that this is 125 Asylum Street, and the city is in Hartford. And you'll notice when I click off of that field, it brings me to my zip code table, allowing me to pick from all of the different zip codes that are in Hartford that we've stored in the database. It happens to be 06141. I'll say, of course, this is in Connecticut. I could put in a different phone number for them. Let's say that was the phone number. And also, I could put in a different contact if there was a different contact here. I could also fill in any communication information that might differ, like fax number, email, and home page for this different address. Now, just to demonstrate how this works, if I close out of this window and I create, let's say, a new purchase invoice to Nissan Forklift Corporation, okay, I'm going to choose Nissan Forklift Corporation in this particular case. And here, of course, it brings in our buy from address and so forth here. And on the invoicing tab, it brings in the same information here. But what we could do, if we wanted to, for this particular vendor, is we could specify a different order address code. So here, right on the General tab, we have Order Address Code field. If I click on that lookup, now you'll notice it lists for me the alternate addresses, the different order addresses for this vendor. So I could say, you know what, I'm ordering from the Hartford office. So I choose Hartford, and now you'll notice when I enter off of that field, it changed my buy from address to Asylum Street in Hartford, Connecticut. And if you look at the Invoicing tab, though, the Pay To vendor ended up staying the same. So I'm still going to pay to the corporate office in Marengo, Illinois, but in this particular case I just chose a different order address code. So if you prefer to keep all of your ledger entries and everything, all the information stored on one particular vendor card, as opposed to creating multiple vendor cards for the different offices, such as a local office or a corporate office. You could use the order address code instead of using a pay to vendor. Okay, where can I see statistics on the amount of purchases that I had done with a particular vendor? Well, right from this particular card here, I can go to the vendor button and choose statistics, or simply press the F9 key as indicated here. And what this does is it brings us out to our vendor statistics window. It has two tabs, general and purchases, and you'll notice here on the general tab it shows my current balance with the vendor. It shows any outstanding orders. So right from the balance field, I can also get to those ledger entries that make up that balance, just like we did from the vendor card in the general tab. Here it shows the outstanding orders. I've got $197.71 in outstanding orders for this vendor. And how do I know what makes that up? I can go right here, click on the drill down arrow in that field, and it brings me out to the purchase line, showing me that I've ordered a muffler, an adjuster, and a roller C500 from them. From here as well, it shows the amount that has been received but not invoiced. So obviously these outstanding orders that's out there, we haven't received those particular items from that vendor yet. We haven't received them or invoiced, so they are both outstanding. Then it gives me my total amount for this. So it gives me the combination of the balance plus outstanding orders. And then it shows me the overdue amounts as of 11/30/04. If I click into that field, you'll notice I can now click on the drill down arrow for that, and it brings me out and shows me just those that happen to be overdue. So it does a filter on the ledger entries for that vendor, showing me only those that happen to be past due in this case. Also, from the vendor statistics, I can go to purchases, and I can see all of the purchase amounts, invoice discount, total invoice amounts for this, any reminders, finance charges, and so forth here for my current month of November. I happen to be working in the system as of 11/30/04, so it'll show me anything for the current month. So obviously with this vendor, we haven't done any activity this month. For the current year, so it'll show me this year 661,000 in purchases and invoicing that got created, and it shows the total amount of payments that I made, 660,369.16. It'll also show me a comparison for this year to last year. If I had any information in the system for the previous year, it would compare all of those numbers here, allowing me to look at maybe a trend that was happening. And then it also shows to date from the beginning of time for this vendor. Okay, now where could I find out what the last invoice and last payment that I made to a particular vendor were? Well, right from the vendor button, I can go out here and I have a choice now for entry statistics. So statistics is a little different than entry statistics. If I click on entry statistics, it'll show me here on the last documents tab what the last payment that I made to the vendor was and the date. So it shows date 9/10/04, document or check number 10047 for 1,514.90. It shows if there's any remaining amount open. And then it also shows last invoice, credit memo, reminder, finance charge, and refund that were created for this vendor. So here I've got an invoice on 8/15/04 for invoice number VCH00240 for 183.91, and it shows that that is still open. I have a remaining amount of 183.91. Then of course it would show all the additional ones if I had any with that. Also on the vendor entry statistics, I can go to the number of documents tab, and here it'll show me the number of payments that were made for the current month, and invoices and credit memos and so forth. It'll also show me for the current year. So I had 17 payments in the year and 21 invoices that were generated from this vendor. Credit memos, reminders, finance charges, and refunds. It'll also show me a comparison to last year and what the remaining amounts that happen to be open for each one of these documents are. So here, once again, it shows our 735.64 open balance with this vendor from those invoices. Okay, and finally, where can I find 1099 information out about a particular vendor? So if you had a vendor on the Payments tab where you've specified a 1099 code, such as, let's say, Jim's Landscaping Services. Here we've specified a 1099 code of miscellaneous 07, and if I click on that lookup arrow, it brings me to my form box and it shows that is non-employee compensation. Well, how can I tell how much I generated for this particular vendor? Well, right from this vendor button again, I can go out and choose 1099 statistics, which is the keyboard shortcut of Shift F9. If I choose that, it'll show me that for all the different 1099 codes that I might have posted with this vendor, in this particular case just one, miscellaneous '07, it shows me the amounts for the current year. So 2004, I'm in 11/30 of 2004, shows my total amount of $800 for non-employee compensation for this vendor. Now what I do is if I go out to the vendor button, if I come back to the vendor card here, I've got this 1099 code of miscellaneous '07. I click on that lookup arrow, brings me back out here, and it shows that the minimum reportable is $600. So it looks like I'm going to have to create a 1099 form at the end of the year to send to this vendor because they hit that threshold of $600, as we confirmed right from our 1099 statistics, shows that $800 amount. So, finding information on a vendor card is fairly simple. There are lots of different fields and so forth available to you and different areas where you can grab information. We hope that this video is helpful in helping you to work with a vendor card and find that information when necessary. This concludes the video on working with a vendor card.